In 1973, inside CIA headquarters, boxes of documents went through a shredder on the direct order of the agency's own director. Whatever was in them, someone wanted it gone completely, permanently, before anyone outside the building could ever read a single page. What almost disappeared forever that year is now fully declassified, confirmed by a presidential commission, a Senate investigation, and thousands of pages of surviving government records. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's confirmed American history, and most people have no idea how far it actually went. It's called MK Ultra, and it ran for roughly 20 years, from the early 1950s into the early 1970s. It grew out of a genuine Cold War panic. After the Korean War, American officials became convinced that Soviet and Chinese interrogators had discovered real techniques for brainwashing prisoners, and the CIA decided the only responsible move was to master those same techniques first before an enemy could use them against Americans. Two earlier programs, codenamed Bluebird and then Artichoke, tested drugs and hypnosis on subjects through the early 1950s. In 1953, under a chemist named Sidney Gottlieb, those efforts were folded into a much larger, better-funded program, MK Ultra. Here's what it actually involved, according to the CIA's own surviving records. At its peak, MK Ultra ran roughly 150 separate subprojects spread across more than 80 different institutions, universities, hospitals, and prisons, many of which had no idea their work connected to a CIA program at all. Researchers administered LSD and in some cases cocaine, heroin, and other substances, often to people who had no idea they were being drugged at all. A federal narcotics agent named George White ran CIA-funded safe houses in San Francisco and New York under an internal program later nicknamed Operation Midnight Climax, where unsuspecting clients were secretly dosed with LSD while agents watched their reactions from behind one-way glass. Other subprojects tested extreme sensory deprivation, electroshock, and hypnosis, searching for ways to erase memory, implant false ones, or break down a person's will entirely. A 1956 memo, since declassified, approved high-dose LSD experiments on federal prisoners specifically because they couldn't easily refuse. The human cost had a name. In 1953, an Army scientist named Frank Olson was secretly dosed with LSD by his own CIA colleagues without his knowledge during what he believed was a routine work retreat. 9 days later, deeply disturbed and disoriented, he fell to his death from a 10th-floor hotel window in New York City. The CIA told his family it was suicide, brought on by a pre-existing condition. For over 20 years, that was the only version anyone outside the agency ever heard. When the truth about the drugging finally came out in the 1970s, President Gerald Ford personally apologized to the Olson family, and Congress awarded them a financial settlement. Still unsatisfied, the family had Olson's body exhumed in 1994, and a forensic examination found evidence some experts considered inconsistent with a simple fall, including trauma patterns that raised more questions than they answered. To this day, serious questions about exactly what happened in that hotel room remain unresolved. This program didn't happen in some hidden bunker either. It reached directly into respected American institutions. At Georgetown University Hospital, the CIA quietly funneled money through something called the Geschickter Fund for Medical Research, a foundation run by a professor there, eventually contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars toward an entire new hospital wing. Doctors and researchers at real universities and hospitals carried out CIA-linked research, and internal records suggest many of them never fully understood who was actually funding their work, or why. Even inside the CIA, a 1963 Inspector General's report specifically raised concerns about testing drugs on unwitting American citizens. The program continued anyway, for another decade. By 1973, Facing growing political pressure and increased scrutiny in the aftermath of Watergate, CIA Director Richard Helms ordered Sidney Gottlieb to destroy the MKUltra files entirely. And most of them were. It should have vanished from history completely, an almost perfect cover-up. But roughly 20,000 documents survived, purely by accident, because they'd been misfiled years earlier in an unrelated financial records archive that nobody thought to check. When journalists and investigators went looking in the mid-1970s, following a New York Times investigation and a presidential panel called the Rockefeller Commission, those misfiled boxes were still sitting there, untouched. That discovery helped trigger a much larger Senate investigation known as the Church Committee, formed to examine intelligence abuses across the entire government, not just MKUltra alone. In 1977, the surviving documents were finally released to the public, and a separate Senate hearing put MKUltra directly on the record for good. Standing on the Senate floor that year, Senator Ted Kennedy called it a program that offends the sensibilities of every American. Here's the detail that should genuinely unsettle you. This isn't a closed chapter that's fully understood 50 years later. In December of 2024, the National Security Archive released over 1,200 additional pages of newly declassified MKUltra documents, details the public had simply never seen before. And in 2025, the CIA's own internal testimony from Sidney Gottlieb himself, given directly to Senate investigators, was finally published in full for the very first time, 50 years after he actually gave it. We are still, right now, in the process of learning exactly what one government agency was willing to do to its own citizens, in secret, for 2 full decades. And we may not have the whole picture even yet, because a meaningful share of it was deliberately turned to ash in 1973 and can never be recovered. So here's the uncomfortable question worth sitting with. This wasn't hidden in some distant, unaccountable regime. It happened inside one of the most scrutinized governments on Earth, using its own hospitals, its own respected researchers, and its own citizens for 20 years before anyone outside a small circle knew it existed at all. What does it actually take for something like that to survive that long in plain sight? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this changed how you think about what stays hidden, hit like and subscribe.